Right, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. My time is getting shorter and shorter. I don't think somebody does not like me reading this book. I think it might have been the book of Daniel where I talked about the eagle's wings getting clipped and then the lion ceasing to be a beast. And the lion no longer has the heart of a beast, but the lion has the heart of a man. uh, Anyways, let's get it done. These people are so cowardly, man. Really. Mike and Martin. Chapter 12, The Temple. Mike and Martin were responsible for the tribe of Judah, which covered all of the Middle East, as well as East Africa. When the temple in Jerusalem was nearing completion, the pair made a rare trip away from their computers in Ankara to visit a tiny team of workers in the holy city. One reason for the trip was that they wanted to see for themselves what all the fuss was about. Mike's archaeological background included a keen interest in architecture as well. The Pope had made good on his offer to move to Jerusalem, and a palatial residence was being built for him not far from the Temple Mount. The move was seen by experts to be on par with Constantine's conversion to Christianity, by declaring Christianity the state religion and himself as the head of that religion. Constantine had lured early Christians out of the catacombs and into his courts, where they have been ever since. In a similar tactic, the Pope was now reaching out to embrace Jews and Muslims as brothers, whether they liked it or not, and in doing so, he was setting himself up as the unofficial patriarch of all three religions. The Jews wanted their temple badly enough to overlook such a move on the part of Rome, and the overwhelming presence of the UN military might in Jerusalem at that time left Muslims with no little choice but to go along with whatever their other two brothers had decreed. Although 2,000 years of tradition had made Vatican City almost as sacred as the Pope himself, there could be no disputing the fact that Jerusalem outweighed Rome in the holy city stakes. The vicar of Christ could not do better than to set up residence in the holiest of holies. In January of that year, the agreement had been made to build the twin temples. Now, some 7 months later, construction was already nearing completion. Mike and Martin toured the site to observe the progress for themselves. The Dome of the Rock, where Muhammad was said to have ascended into heaven, had been pretty much left untouched. This was possible because the Jewish temple had been positioned in an east-west direction rather than a north-south, over the dome of the tablet, which was located just a few yards north of the Muslim mosque. The temple entrance was perfectly aligned with the Golden Gate of the eastern wall, following the original pattern for the temple's construction, but using a slightly longer cubit. The new temple fit perfectly on the northern end of the platform that had originally been built for the visitors to the Dome of the Rock. There was a matching Catholic basilica called the Cathedral of the Divine Creation built on the southern end of the Temple Mount. Outwardly, it appeared to be a twin of the Jewish temple, but the interior was laid out differently. In order to accommodate large crowds for Mass and a cathedral choir, where the Holy of Holies was located in the Jewish floor plan. There was a Catholic tabernacle to hold the Blessed Sacrament. The entire platform area had been enlarged so that there was plenty of courtyard space for the temple, the mosque and the cathedral. The two Christians could not deny that the golden dome in the middle of two pure white matching temples was a masterpiece of religious architecture. Religious leaders were abuzz with talk of how Jerusalem, the city of peace, was finally going to live up to its name. The matching temples were a sure omen that world peace was on its way. Prefabricated sections had appeared for the temple as if out of nowhere, reducing the time needed for construction. There was no waiting for materials or fittings either, as they had almost been purchased or fashioned in advance to be stored nearby. Much of the secular world did not care about the temple one way or another, but there were some to whom it meant a great deal. Most surprisingly amongst the group, however, was Secretary General Zhu Dangchao, a man who had never been known to show any religious interest in the past. He had cancelled more important appointments in order to be in Jerusalem when key decisions were made about the temple project. While Mike and Martin were in Jerusalem, a report came out in the Time magazine, now based in Hong Kong, about Deng Chao's ancestry. It was not given prominence in the magazine, but it did offer an explanation for Deng Chao's interest in the temple, which Mike in particular was drawn to. It seems that although Deng Chao had been born and raised in Tibet, his parents had actually come from Kaifeng province in China. Zhu was one of 7 Chinese names that had been adopted by some wandering Jews who had settled in China more than 1,000 years earlier. The Jewish men had married Chinese women, and for many generations that their descendants were not racially distinguishable from their full-blood Chinese neighbors. Nevertheless, because Chinese genealogy is so important, and because ancestral roots are traced through their father, the Jews of Kaifeng never forgot that they were Jews. And because ancestral roots are traced through the father, the Jews of Kaifeng never forgot that they were Jews. Few, if any, of the accessories of Judaism remained, but Deng Chao's father had left one reminder of his roots. He named his son Levi Zhu Dangchao. The use of a third name in China was not unusual, but a Jewish third name was almost unheard of. Outside of Kaifeng province, young Zhu Dangchao had ceased to use his Jewish name when he moved from Tibet to England to study at Oxford. And the question of him having another name had never been brought up after that until now. The news report suggested that Deng Chao's Jewish ancestry was the reason for his keen interest in getting a temple built in Jerusalem. Obviously, it said he was showing loyalty to his ancestors, which touched the hearts of many. Of course, that did not explain why Deng Chao was also instrumental in getting the Cathedral of the Divine Creation built on the Temple Mount. Mike sensed something far more sinister, both in Zhu Dangchao's third name and in the 3 temples. When he had read the story, he went back and studied Deng Chao's full name, continuing the value of the letters in it. Counting the value of the letters in it, sorry. There it is, said Martin, who had read the article with him. The missing numbers in his name, add them up now, and what you get. Mike was talking about the letters L, V, and I in the name Levi. They represented 50, 5, and 1 in Roman numerals, together with the Roman numerals X, D, and C from the name Zhujiangtao, which represented 10, 500, and 100 in Roman numerals. The numeric value of his name came to 666, the predicted number for the name of the world's final global leader, the Antichrist. Mike knew Rayford had been pondering the significance of Deng Char's name, and so he passed the article on to him. Rayford responded with a prediction to the 12 tribes. In less than 3 years, he said, Deng Chao will cause the sacrifices to cease, and he himself will take control of the temple. Of course, he's interested in every detail of its construction. It will be one day his throne, and he will be demanding that the whole world worship him. Rayford had written previously regarding what he saw as significant about the temples themselves. They, like Deng Chao, were a clever counterfeit. He had said, quite frankly, they represented mankind's belief that peace can be found through the works of their own hands, and not through humble faith of God. It all seems harmless enough to people who have never taken Jesus seriously. Most of the church is still living in the Old Testament, where temple worship was acceptable. So a building, even a complex of 3 different buildings which unites 3 of the most powerful religions on earth, must, in their eyes, be a good thing. But that's only because they recognize faith through buildings and not through personal conviction. The coming together of the institutional church was, according to Rayford, a diabolical imitation of the coming together of the invisible church, as was happening in the formation of the 12 tribes. World religions place their hopes in political solutions, he said, while true believers were in tune with the Spirit of God, who would bring them together in this way. Except the Lord built the house, they labor in vain who build it, he quoted from the Old Testament. Mike and Martin were back in Ankara when the official opening came, but they watched live coverage on TV along with the rest of the world. The Cathedral of Divine Creation was not quite finished when it came time for the opening of the temple on a hot summer day near the end of July. The media was not bothered by what was or was not happening with the cathedral. However, they could see cathedrals any day and almost everywhere. Their interest was the temple. There could only be one Jewish temple. Although the high priest tribe of Levi had long since died out, a new tribe of priests had been artificially produced by raising selected Jewish boys under a strict priestly code of discipline. From these, the high priest had been chosen to preside over the affairs of the temple, including its high-profile opening. You see how easy it is for these people just to do these things, just to replace, just to fake prophecies, just to bring in like some Jewish boys and call them now the Levites. Like, it's been done before. We expect no less. Prominent Jewish religious leaders were present, along with many Jewish political personalities. Although non-Jews were not allowed inside, photos and drawings of the interior were given to the press. Solomon himself would have been impressed. Almost everything was solid gold or silver, or at least gold or silver plated. Plush carpets and closed circuit security system, air conditioning, and a top class sound system all represented improvements on either of the two earlier temples, the one built by Solomon or later the one built by Zerubbabel. The first two temples had featured the Ark of the Covenant, a sacred box in which the original Ten Commandments and other holy relics were held. Only the high priest could enter the Holy of Holies, where the Ark resided, and he could only do it once a year. When he did, he would have a rope tied around his waist in the event that he should die while there. It was believed that if there was unconfessed sin in his life, he would be struck dead by the presence of God. The new temple had nothing to compare with the original Ark or the original Ten Commandments, but it did have a veritable museum of Jewish artifacts honoring their history, both in the Old Testament times and in more recent times. The housing of these artifacts was not limited to the Holy of Holies. They were displayed throughout the temple complex. When Solomon dedicated the temple, fire came down from heaven and consumed the sacrifice. That miraculous flame had been tended continuously after that to keep it burning. But no one expected God to honor the new temple with such a display of power. That reminds me of a film called, what is it called? The Two Kings. It's supposed to be about the beginning, the founding of Rome. It's a good film, but you know, all these films, they all take little pieces of a Bible, you know. When you read the Bible, you find these things out, you notice these things. But they know most people don't read the Bible. Where was I? That was it. When Solomon dedicated the temple, fire came down from heaven and consumed the sacrifice. That miraculous flame had been tended continuously after that to keep it burning, but no one expected God to honor the new temple with such a display of power. So other arrangements had been made. That's because it's not actually in Jerusalem and you're not actually the people. So behave. We'll see. We'll see. We'll see. We're coming back, and so will the miracles. You'll see. When we're back, the signs and wonders are back. But no one expected God to honor the new temple with such a display of power, so other arrangements had been made which were arguably more sensational in their own way. A remote-controlled laser beam was triggered to strike in the center of the altar, igniting a huge eternal flame into which the sacrifices would be thrown. Dignitary after dignitary came forward with speeches of hope and rejoicing for his obvious fulfillment of Israel's destiny as God's people. Sacrifices continued throughout the day and on into the night as lesser dignitaries waited patiently for their opportunity to make up for almost 2,000 years without a proper sacrifice on their behalf or on behalf of their ancestors. There were tears of joy and partying throughout the city all that night. The Wailing Wall had turned into the wall of rejoicing, and much of the world rejoiced with the Jews, who had suffered so much over the centuries, and who were now back worshipping in their own temple, or at least in one that UN Secretary General Levi Zhao Dengchao had arranged for them to use for a while. You see, this is like typical worldly attitudes. Like, there were tears of joy and partying throughout the city all that night. The Wailing Wall had turned into a wall of rejoicing, and so much of the world rejoiced with the Jews, who had suffered so much over the centuries and who were now back worshipping in their temple. Like, everybody just forgets like who has really suffered, who has really suffered over the centuries. And it's still happening today. It's right in front of your eyes. And you just don't get it. This is why you need to read the Bible. You need to read the Old Testament. You need to read everything. And you need to keep reading. Because it's so obvious. How many times do I have to say it? Like, these people are prosperous. They have control of industries. They have control. Unbelievable. People know. It's just obvious, you know. You just can't admit it, because then you have to admit your country's involvement. And it's admitting... End of chapter. Zion Ben Jonah writes, the curtain over the Holy of Holies was supernaturally torn from top to bottom. Matthew 27:50 to 51. At about the same time that Jesus Christ said, "It is finished," and died on the cross nearly 2,000 years ago. John 19:30, Jesus had predicted the destruction of that temple. Matthew 24:2, a prophecy which was fulfilled in 70 AD. Although there was a misunderstanding about what he actually said, the only charge that his accusers had been able to get more than one witness to agree on during his trial was that Jesus somehow threatened their precious temple. Matthew 26:59 to 62. Certainly, what Jesus represented was far more important than the temple. Matthew 12:12-6. He spoke of a time when unity would not be determined on the basis of where we worship, but rather on the basis of invisible inner traits like sincerity and faith. John 4:21-24. Our bodies have now become the place where God resides. 1 Corinthians 3:16. Modern Christianity has, however, returned to the hype and trappings of Old Testament temple worship, so that the institution church today is little more than Judaism with a new coat of paint. But talk of unity, which is based primarily on political organizations and visible structures, is always going to miss the mark. Talk of love without submission to the one who is love will never be able to produce the goods when called upon to do so. Amen to that. Ain't that the truth? Nothing is gonna work unless it's all done under the word of God. It's all done under submission. It's all done biblically. Nothing is going to work. Love is love, this and that. Unite in the religions. No, we can't unite under religions. Because with us, any believers in the Bible, there's only one God. There's only one true God. And we can't accept all this nonsense which is going on in the West. We cannot. We cannot accept it. It just doesn't mix. So Britain can talk. People can talk. Oh, Britain needs to come back. Europe needs to come back to Christianity. But but you're focusing on the Muslims. No. You just don't get it. You don't get it. Since when was Britain and all these European places, since when were they Christian countries? This is just as the dude described. Modern Christianity is, however, returned to the hype and trappings of old temple worship, so that the institutional church today is little more than Judaism with a new coat of paint. But talk of a unity which is based on primarily political organizations and visible structures is always going to miss the mark. I can't stand to hear this nonsense now. Oh, we need to come back to Christianity and we need to come back. Yes, you do. But it's got nothing to do with kicking Muslims out of Europe. It's very similar. You're just looking for someone to blame. You're looking to split everybody up, put everybody back in factions. It's just ridiculous. Don't listen to these idiots. So, what's the first thing that comes into your mind when I say infidel? Okay. Infidels say that it seems wholly inconsistent with what we should suppose to be the merciful character of God, that he should thus command whole nations to be destroyed. Infidels say that it seems wholly inconsistent with what we should suppose to be the merciful character of God, that he should thus command the whole nations to be destroyed by the sword. But when we see juries in our own countries bring a verdict of guilty, the judge pronouncing a sentence of death, and that sentence executed, we do not complain. That's what I've been saying. Like, we follow man's rules. We follow rules at work. We follow the laws of man, but we don't want to follow God. We do not complain, but there is anything unjust in the act. We do not complain that there is anything unjust in the act. These Canaanites are proved to have polluted and stained the land with intolerable crimes. It was merely the holy judge of the Father pronouncing the sentence on flagrant criminals, and Joshua, the righteous governor, executing that sentence to the letter. It was not an act of arbitrary or private revenge, but the execution of the sentence of veritable justice, and as such had perhaps a great mercy to the innocents and as justice to the guilty. Written by John Cumming, cited by James C. Gray and George M. Adams, Bible Commentary. So basically, infidels is unbelievers, people who are always arguing against God, arguing against the Bible. I don't know. But why would God do? That's infidels, right? But what was the first thing that came into your head? This is what they do. This is the brainwashing. This is the conditioning. What they're doing with red pill. We've all seen the movie The Matrix. We know what red pill means. But now they're changing it to mean these weak, cowardly, like lustful, covetous men who are upset by, who are upset by women, and just, instead of just saying, okay, if that's how you want to be, fine. There's no need to make a whole channel dedicated to trashing these women. There are so many other women out there. That's all you need to do. That's all you need to do. It's simple. This whole red pill community, this whole manosphere thing, that's not red pill. We all know what red pill is. We've all seen Matrix movies. But no, this is what they do, the mainstream. They push these channels. I'm sure they pay these people extra to call it red pill. They elevate these channels. And then before you know it, the whole meaning of it is changed. They did the same thing with woke. They did the same thing with Jew. Do you get it now? Do you get it? Do you get it now? Unbelievable.